All right. So um, now I'm just going to move on to, we're going to kind of wrap up this section with some rather, um, I don't want to say insignificant, but you won't see any documentaries produced by some of these other presidents following. So Whig William Henry Harrison ran against the Democrat President Van Buren. Um, they were both wealthy men portraying themselves as commoners. By the way, that's something we should always take note of. I mean, especially, you look at, let's say, George Bush, and I'm going to just pick on him for this because he's the only one I can really think of as truly a great example of this. George W. Bush Jr., um, you know, spent much of his time in Texas as a kind of Texas rancher type guy. He's got a strong jaw. And he would be made fun of sometimes for the way that he would talk and the fact that he could, you know, mess up English. His grammar was off. By the way, I have the same problem, but for different reasons. I'm not even, uh, we're close to a rancher type guy. But the bottom line is, um, George Bush came off as kind of like a guy with a cowboy hat that was one of the good old boys. You could have a beer with him and have a barbecue with George Bush Jr. Um, but in fact, he grew up in a very much in an ivory tower, and some of the wealthiest. Well, his parents, under his father, he obviously was growing up in one of the most politically powerful households, as long as extreme amount of wealth. But his demeanor came off as kind of a good old boy, right? And I think he really kind of relished in portraying himself that way. What's amazing is that often really works, even though you can research these things. We can know the background of some of our politicians, and know that they're not really a commoner. I think in the case of Andrew Jackson, he was a part of the wealthy elite class at the end of his life as well, but he truly was of a lower status growing up. And as you've seen in the documentary, he had a pretty tough childhood. And so I think that that's something that Americans respect. So what we really like to see is a person born into wealth and who comes off as if they've always been born into wealth. We don't have a lot of respect for that. That feels too much like an aristocracy. But when you can portray yourself as one of the average hardworking people of America that then rose to power, or you rose to power but you're still just one of us, one of them, one of the good old boys, Americans like that because that's a part of our a kind of idea we have of ourselves, right? The rags to riches story. Okay, so that's what we really like, and I think that politicians have often been able to kind of play on that theme and get votes for it. So Harrison talked about loving his log cabins and hard cider, right? And Van Buren was portrayed as an aloof aristocrat. So again, they're both kind of from the same backgrounds, but coming off very different aesthetically. This was kind of how Bush was with Kerry. Kerry and Bush were both two elites, but let's face it, Kerry's personality was dry as toast. You wouldn't want to have a beer and a barbecue with Kerry, but you did want to have one with Bush. And so I think that's the other thing is you have like these kind of elections where someone comes off being believably, a person who would be in a log cabin and drink hard cider, Um, but the real issue, of course, always goes to this, and things haven't changed much. When you have a bad economy and you're sitting down as a president, whether it's your fault or not, you get blamed for it. If the economy's good, even though it could have been because of a president or two or three behind you, the results of some long-term planning, well, it doesn't matter. When you're sitting as president, when it's going well, you get the credit for going well. When it's going bad, even if you have nothing to do with that, you get blamed. Okay, so that's another kind of trait we see in politics. So, what happens? Harrison dies of pneumonia 1 month after taking office. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of one of those sad stories, right? Where somebody, could have had a legacy, and we don't. What do we say? A month? That's it. So, what ends up happening is his vice president, John Tyler, succeeded him. And he was not solidly a Whig or tied to the party. Um, he refused to support Clay's attempt to recharter the Bank of the United States. Every cabinet member resigned. He replaced with Democrats such as Calhoun, who recently switched back. And then many conservative Southern Whigs became members of the Democratic Party. And what I want you to remember that, or what's good to realize, okay? So remember that the Whig Party was basically a kind of set up to be opposed to Jacksonian policies. And, that's now no longer a necessary thing. And the Democratic Party at this point is going to define itself. And remember, this is also going to be the slave party, okay? The mainly the party of the South that is going to advocate on behalf of slavery. And, we'll talk about this more later, right? The irony that the first black president of the United States became a president in the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party was actually the slave party. And things change. So also remember that the labels change. I mean, when you look in U.S. history, I was just watching the other day on YouTube that Ronald Reagan advocating on behalf of amnesty for illegal immigrants, and he made a very long and strong, hard case for it. This is a guy who is essentially seen as one of the quintessential conservatives, very much a hero in American politics. But I don't think that he could give a speech like that now and survive politically in the Republican Party, or even being called a conservative. My only point to mention that for is to remind us how, in a short period of time, words can change drastically positions and expectations of what particular parties or figures are supposed to be able to accomplish. So I kind of went off on a lot of side details, but I'm hoping to kind of add some perspectives to kind of get you to think about some of these things from the past and, a look at where they are now. So that's all we're going to do for this section. And any other questions, of course, feel free to contact me, as I always mention.